At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. The most dangerous part of selling contraband samosas was the clientele. Not that it was a highly illegal act. The law was a set of badly written rules spawned from galactic hysteria. The clientele, on the other hand, were twitchy, paranoid, and armed. This one, a Grulian broker whose name sounded like a drawer full of cutlery falling down a flight of stairs, was currently demonstrating all three traits in the grimy, dripping confines of a back alley stall on Scrapfall. Two of his spindly hands nervously adjusted his jacket, while the other two drummed a frantic, silent rhythm on the rust-stained table. His stalk eyes were swiveling in opposite directions, and a plasma-charred holdout blaster was peeking from under his synth leather jacket. "The credits are verified," Lucas Komodo said, keeping his voice as smooth as a perfect bechamel. He held up the thermal-lined case, its polished surface a stark contrast to the filth surrounding them. "The product is hot, fresh, and contains the ratio of potato to spiced pea filling you requested. Shall we conclude this transaction so we can all go on with our busy, law-abiding lives?" The Grulian's left eye swiveled to focus on him, its pupil a contracting slit. The right one stayed on Hesh, who was standing a few feet away, looking as immovable as a geological feature. Hesh's sheer mass seemed to absorb the flickering light of the bare bulb overhead.
"The Enforcement Division has been sniffing around this sector,"
the broker chittered, his voice thin and reedy.
"A new inspector, Xanon. They say he can smell contraband yeast spores from a parsec away."
"Good thing these are fried, not baked," Lucas said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No yeast, just pure, unadulterated, illegal deliciousness. Now, the credits?" The broker slid a credit chip across the table. Its surface was greasy from his touch. Lucas picked it up and slotted it into his datapad. As the numbers scrolled, a faint distortion in the air behind the Grulian caught his eye, like heat haze off pavement. A cloaking field failing. Two heavily built enforcers, not council, but local syndicate muscle, materialized with grim expressions and much larger blasters. The broker's cutlery drawer name was probably also the sound he made when he double-crossed people. "Ah," Lucas said, his mind racing. "It appears we have a clerical error." He didn't wait for a response. His hand shot into the case, grabbing a samosa. It was practically glowing with heat, the delicate pastry shell warm and yielding against his fingertips. "The filling is straight from the thermal case," Lucas thought. "Hot enough to cause second-degree burns on a Grulian's ridiculously sensitive ocular membranes. Not lethal, but it'll make him think his face is melting. Gives us 10 seconds, maybe less." The broker was just starting to grin, a horrifying display of needle-like teeth, when Lucas crushed the samosa in his fist. With a flick of his wrist, he flung the steaming, spicy filling directly at the broker's face. The Grulian shrieked, a high-pitched wail of agony, clawing at his face as his nervous system screamed that he was on fire. The two thugs, momentarily stunned by the sheer absurdity of being attacked with a potato-based appetizer, hesitated. That was all Hesh needed. He crossed the space between them in two massive strides. His left hand seized one thug's collar, his right seized the other's, and he cracked their helmets together with a sickening crunch of plastoid. They crumpled to the ground in a heap of limp limbs and sparking electronics. "Let's go," Lucas said, grabbing the case and sprinting.
"The credits did not clear,"
Hesh rumbled, easily keeping pace with him, his long strides eating up the grimy alleyway. "I know, the nerve, right?" Lucas yelled back, dodging a pile of discarded droid parts that leaked a foul-smelling fluid. "I spent 2 hours getting the spice blend just right, and he tries to stiff us." They burst out of the alley and onto a crowded market street. The air was thick with the smells of alien livestock and the sharp metallic scent of ionized air from passing skimmers. Lucas risked a glance back. The broker was on his knees, still screaming, but he was pointing two shaky, four-fingered hands in their direction. "Fez, you better be ready," Lucas shouted into his wrist comm. "Been ready for 10 minutes, snack boy," a dry voice crackled back. "Did you get paid or did you start a food fight again?" "Option B, docking bay 94, go, go, go." They pounded down the street, shouldering past startled merchants and annoyed shoppers. A Lithian and a human running at full tilt tended to clear a path. Ahead, the angular, patched-together form of their ship, the Flying Skillet, was visible, its landing ramp blessedly down. At the top of the ramp stood Fez, a compact woman with grease-streaked hands and an expression of profound exasperation. She held a large hydrospanner like a scepter. "This emergency takeoff just blew out the primary capacitor," she stated as they thundered up the ramp. "Add it to your tab and hit the button." The ramp hissed shut behind them. Lucas didn't even wait for the artificial gravity to fully orient before he was scrambling towards the cockpit. Hesh was already in the co-pilot seat, his huge hands expertly flipping switches and rerouting power with surprising delicacy.
"They're coming,"
Hesh said, his voice a low vibration that Lucas felt in his teeth. His gaze was fixed on the rear scanner.
"2 light freighters, modified."
"Junkers with oversized cannons," Fez spat, as her right hand keyed a sequence into the power distribution board, while her left gripped the yoke, priming the repulsor lifts. "Cute. Hang on." The Flying Skillet was a battered, heavily modified cargo hauler that looked like it had lost a fight with an asteroid field and then been put back together with spit and sheer willpower. But Fez knew its every groan, its every shudder. She pushed the throttle forward and the ship lurched into the air, engines screaming in protest before settling into a powerful roar. They shot out of the docking bay, sending crates and terrified dock workers scattering. "Evasive maneuvers!" Lucas yelled, strapping himself into the navigator's chair. "That's my line," Fez grumbled, but she was already banking the ship hard to port, threading them between 2 towering skyscrapers built from scavenged ship hulls. A volley of plasma fire sizzled past their cockpit, close enough to make the viewport flicker with static. "Hesh, reroute auxiliary power to the aft shields," Fez commanded.
"Done,"
Hesh confirmed. "Hesh, you're pulling from the galley regulators," Fez snapped, her eyes fixed forward. "Lucas, the oven just spiked to 900 Kelvin. Your precious food better not be in there." "Just my shattered hopes and dreams," Lucas muttered, watching the pursuing ships on his screen. "They're gaining." "They're predictable," Fez countered. She jerked the control yoke, sending the skillet into a gut-wrenching dive straight towards the planet's surface. The city raced up to meet them. "What are you doing?" Lucas gasped, his knuckles white on the edge of his console. "Applying a little chaos theory," Fez said, a feral grin spreading across her face. "They expect us to run for open space. We're going to give them a tour of downtown." She leveled out just above the maglev traffic, weaving through lanes of sleek, automated transports and sluggish cargo haulers. Horns blared in a dozen alien languages. The 2 pursuing ships followed, less nimble, their shots going wide and blasting chunks out of buildings. Alarms began to wail across the city. "We are now officially a public menace," Lucas noted. "We've been a public menace for 3 years, Fez shot back. "This is just the first time we've had witnesses." She saw her opening, a tight maintenance corridor between 2 power conduits that pulsed with a dull red light. "Hesh, hold on to your lunch."
"I have not had lunch,"
Hesh said, his tone mournful.
"The samosas were for the client."
Fez yanked the ship into the corridor. The walls were so close, Lucas could see the rust patterns on the pipes. For a terrifying second, it seemed they wouldn't fit, but Fez was a master. The Flying Skillet scraped through with a shriek of metal on metal, emerging on the other side. Their pursuers, larger and less agile, couldn't follow. They were forced to pull up, giving Fez the precious seconds she needed. She pointed the ship's nose to the sky and slammed the throttle. The engines screamed as they climbed, breaking through the atmosphere into the cold quiet of space. Below them, Scrap Fall was a swirl of brown and green. Ahead, the starfield beckoned. Lucas let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Okay, nice flying." "I know," she said, her breathing a little heavy. "Now, let's talk about the bill for that new paint job, and the capacitor, and my therapy." Lucas leaned back in his chair, the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving behind the familiar ache of exhaustion. He stared out at the starfield, a million points of light in the darkness. It was all so vast, so full of potential. And all of it, every last star system, considered his life's passion to be a Class A biohazard. It never stopped being funny in a tragic career-ending sort of way. It had all started at a party, a very fancy, very important party on the Citadel, the political heart of the Galactic Council. The Galactic Cultural Exchange Gala was supposed to be a symbol of unity, a showcase of the diverse tapestry of life in the Council. Lucas, then just a bright-eyed, ambitious cadet in the Terran Diplomatic Corps, had been chosen to run the Terra booth. He'd been so proud. He'd argued for weeks against the usual display of historical artifacts and boring geological surveys. Culture isn't a fossil, he'd told his superiors, his voice ringing with youthful passion. It's alive. It's something you experience. It's taste and smell and texture. It's the story of a people told in a language everyone understands. Food. He'd won. His booth was a polished chrome and steel mobile kitchen. He was demonstrating the chaotic, beautiful, delicious art of human cooking. He'd spent the whole day crafting delicate canapes, explaining the magic of the Maillard reaction to a gelatinous life form that communicated through interpretive scent, and showing off the simple perfection of fresh pasta to a group of insectoid delegates who found the concept of boiling water fascinating. The crowds loved it. Aliens who normally subsisted on nutrient paste or raw vegetation stared in wonder at the sights and smells emanating from his station. Then Admiral Tyrion had arrived. He was an armatrine, a tall, imposing figure in a crisp white uniform that seemed to absorb sound. His face was a study in stern military discipline. The armatrine were beings of absolute order. Their minds, their society, their biology, it was all geared towards meticulous control. They were the gatekeepers of the galaxy, the only species capable of navigating the unstable hyperspace lanes that held commerce and travel together. They were respected, feared, and never, ever surprised. Until that day. Lucas remembered the moment with painful clarity. The Admiral had stopped at his booth, flanked by two guards whose armor was the color of a starless night. His gaze was analytical, sweeping over the platters of food with an unnerving stillness. "Cadet," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone, "explain this composite." He was pointing at a platter of California rolls. Lucas, beaming with pride, launched into his well-rehearsed speech. "This, Admiral, is a form of sushi. It's a culinary tradition from one of Earth's island nations. We have vinegared rice, imitation crab meat, avocado, and cucumber, all wrapped in a sheet of dried seaweed called nori. It represents a harmony of textures and flavors." The Admiral seemed intrigued. He picked up one with surprising dexterity, his long, slender fingers holding it as if it were a delicate scientific instrument. "And this green paste?" "Ah, that's wasabi," Lucas had said, his enthusiasm getting the better of him. "It's a rhizome, ground into a paste. It provides a brief, pungent heat. A little goes a long way. It's meant to accent the flavor, not overwhelm it." Perhaps he should have emphasized the little part more, or maybe he shouldn't have put a generous, perfectly formed dollop right next to the piece the Admiral was holding. Tyrion, a being who approached every new experience with step-by-step thoroughness, dipped the entire end of the sushi roll into the green mound and popped it into his mouth. For a single, beautiful second, the Admiral's eyes widened, a look of pure, unadulterated shock, as if his brain was trying to process a data stream it had never conceived of. It was the look of a creature of perfect order experiencing true, beautiful chaos for the very first time. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed. Shouts echoed through the hall. Guests stumbled back, overturning tables of delicate alien canapes. Medtechs pushed through the crowd, their voices sharp with urgency. The Admiral's guards drew their sidearms, their movements fluid and silent, creating a protective circle around their fallen leader. The Armatrine ambassador, a severe-looking woman from across the hall, began screaming orders in her harsh, clicking language. Lucas could only stand there, frozen, a pair of chopsticks in his hand, watching the most powerful military leader in the Armatrine Dominion twitching on the floor. The collapse was physical and neurological. His hypersensitive Armatrine nervous system, which allowed him to perceive the complex fractal geometries of hyperspace, went into system-wide shock. It was a sensation so alien, so unexpected, that it crashed his entire operating system. The political fallout was swift and brutal. The Armatrine Dominion, deeply offended and terrified by this unregulated chemical attack, threatened to close the hyperspace lanes, to secede from the Council. Galactic commerce would have collapsed overnight. A deal was struck. A scapegoat was needed. The news holos had a field day. Lucas remembered watching the broadcast from his cramped holding cell, the anchor's face grave and sensationalist. "The tragedy at the Galactic Gala has sent shockwaves through the Council," the anchor had intoned, as footage of Tyrion's seizure played on a loop. "What was meant to be a celebration of culture has become a stark warning about the dangers of unregulated human culinary practices." Then came the headline that would define his life, displayed in bold, dramatic font across the screen. It was the sentence that got him dishonorably discharged, exiled, and turned into a pariah. The Council outlawed human food after one bite nearly killed an admiral. The formal name was the Galactic Human Cuisine Prohibition Act. It didn't ban raw ingredients. Earth-grown apples or wheat were still legal, if niche, commodities. It banned the art, the process, the chaos. It specifically outlawed composite foodstuffs of human origin containing complex and unregulated organic compounds. Sauces, stews, baked goods, cured meats, cheese, tacos, burgers, and of course, pizza. Anything that required a recipe. Human cooking was reclassified from a cultural art form to a form of potential bioterrorism. And Lucas Komodo, the kid who just wanted to show the galaxy how amazing a good meal could be, became its first and most infamous criminal. "The power converter is shot," Fez announced, kicking off the offending piece of machinery. It sparked feebly in response. "I can patch it, but it's not going to hold through another high-G maneuver. We're running on fumes, luck, and my dwindling patience." They were limping through an empty sector of space, the adrenaline of the chase replaced by the grim reality of their situation. The credits from the samosa deal were non-existent. Their fuel was low, their ship was damaged. "My joy is underseasoned," Hesh said from the galley, where he was meticulously cleaning the samosa case, his large brow furrowed in concentration. "I think we're all feeling a little underseasoned, big guy," Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. He was scrolling through black market job boards on his datapad, the offerings bleak. Low risk, low pay cargo runs, a few sketchy personnel transport gigs that screamed kidnapping. Nothing that would pay for a new power converter, let alone a full tank of fuel and a decent meal. Then, a new message blinked into existence in his private, heavily encrypted inbox. He tapped it open. There was no sender ID, no greeting, no preamble, just a set of coordinates and a request. "Chicago-style deep dish pizza, delivery to the Oracle system. Payment, 500,000 credits." Lucas stared at the message. He read it again, then a third time. "Fez, Hesh, you need to see this." Fez tromped in from the engine room, wiping her greasy hands on a rag. Hesh emerged from the galley, his large, gentle eyes curious. They peered over his shoulder at the datapad. Fez whistled, a low, impressed sound. 500,000 credits for a pizza? "A Chicago-style deep dish," Lucas corrected automatically. "That's an architectural achievement, a commitment."
"The Oracle system is a restricted zone," Hesh noted, his voice calm. "Amatrine military control, no unauthorized vessels."
"Which is probably why they're paying 500,000 credits for someone to cater their dinner party," Fez said, her eyes gleaming with a familiar dangerous light. "That's enough to buy a new Mark IV power converter, a full set of shield emitters, and still have enough left over for me to get that chrome polish I've been wanting." It's insane, Lucas said, but the wheels were already turning in his head. Yeast. He'd need a very specific strain of earth-strain yeast for the dough to get the right rise and flavor. High-fat mozzarella, a particular type of canned, crushed tomato for the sauce, and sausage, real fennel-spiced pork sausage. Sourcing those ingredients would be a nightmare, a dangerous, expensive nightmare.
It is a noble quest,
Hesh said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. He had discovered human food through Lucas, and it had fundamentally rewired his stoic Lithan brain. To Hesh, who had been raised on tasteless nutrient paste, a well-made meal was a spiritual experience. To bring such a treasure to a place of darkness, it is our duty. It's a suicide mission, Lucas countered, though his heart was pounding with a terrifying mix of fear and excitement. Deep dish pizza was a pinnacle of the craft, the challenge of it, the sheer audacity.
It's a payday, Fez corrected him. The biggest one we've ever seen. We're dead in the water without it, Lucas. The patch on the converter won't last the day. We can't dock anywhere reputable because we're broke and wanted. This is the only door that's open.
She was right. He looked from Fez's determined face to Hesh's hopeful one. He was their chef, their leader. He was the reason they were in this mess. He was the one who had gotten them out of it. He took a deep breath. All right, but we're going to do this right. If I'm going to risk my life for a pizza, it's going to be the best damn pizza the galaxy has ever seen. He sent a one-word reply to the encrypted message. Accepted. A moment later, a quarter of the payment appeared in their account. 125,000 credits. Just enough to get started. Fez, plot a course for the Umbra 9 moon, Lucas commanded, a new energy surging through him. It's a lawless little rock, but I know a guy who knows a guy who deals in antique microorganisms.
Antique microorganisms?
Fez asked, raising an eyebrow as she headed back to the cockpit. Yeast, Lucas called after her. And Hesh, my friend, we're going shopping for cheese. Hesh's face broke into a rare, slow smile.
My purpose feels savory.
Above the pristine, sterile bridge on the Council Enforcement Division flagship, the Gavel, Inspector Zanin stared at a holographic map of the galaxy. Data streams flowed around him, elegant and orderly. Zanin was a Grecian, a species whose entire philosophy was built on logic and the rejection of superfluous things like emotion or flavor. His face was a mask of placid gray skin, his features sharp and economical. To him, consumption was a biological necessity, a simple refueling process. The human concept of cuisine was a perversion, a dangerous chaotic indulgence that threatened the very fabric of civilized society. "Report," he said, his voice flat and devoid of inflection. His subordinate, a young, nervous-looking officer from the Kelpian race, snapped to attention. "Sir, we have correlated the black market data streams as you requested. In the last rotation, there have been several unusual purchases traceable to a single untagged credit drop." Zanin steepled his long, slender fingers. "Specify unusual." "High-fat bovine dairy solids, processed and aged," the officer read from his data pad. "Processed porcine meat product with high phenyl particulate content. Canned pulp of a specific Solanum lycopersicum variant. And this is the flag, sir. A cryovial of rare earth-strain Saccharomyces cerevisiae spores was purchased on the Umbra 9 moon just hours ago." Zanin processed the information. Bovine dairy solids, cheese, processed porcine meat, sausage, tomato pulp, sauce, yeast, dough. He cross-referenced the components in his vast mental database, a database he had meticulously built by studying thousands of hours of confiscated human culinary archives. The patterns were undeniable. "Deep dish pizza," Zanin murmured. The words felt alien and distasteful in his mouth, like a string of nonsensical syllables. "The recipe is escalating in complexity and caloric density. The subject, this Komodo, is growing bolder." "Sir?" the officer asked, confused.
He's moved past simple fried composites and into advanced baked goods. This requires specialized equipment, a high-temperature convection oven, a ship with a robust power signature. Xanon's eyes narrowed. He brought up the file on the Wasabi incident. The perpetrator, ex-cadet Lucas Komodo, dishonorably discharged, a known associate of a rogue pilot Fez, and a Lithan enforcer Hesh. Their ship, a modified YT-class freighter, the Flying Skillet. Its specifications noted an oversized power core and a custom retrofitted galley. It all fit. It was logical. The credit drop originated from a terminal firewalled by Armatrine military encryptions, the officer added. We can't trace the client, but the delivery coordinates are for the Oracle system. The Oracle system, Xanon repeated. A military fortress, a place no smuggler would dare approach, unless the client was someone with the authority to guarantee their safety upon arrival. Someone very high-ranking, someone Armatrine. His mind instantly went to the catalyst of this whole chaotic affair. Admiral Tyran, the victim, the one who had every reason to want this Komodo brought to justice, or perhaps to want a second taste. The thought was illogical, but the human influence bred illogical behavior. Plot an intercept course, Xanon commanded. Calculate their most likely route from Umbra 9 to the Oracle system, accounting for refueling and potential evasive maneuvers. Komodo is reckless, but his pilot is notoriously clever. She will avoid standard hyperspace lanes. Yes, Inspector. As the officer hurried off, Xanon remained motionless, staring at the star chart. He was the galaxy's foremost authority on the new insidious threat of human cooking. He had studied their techniques, memorized their bizarre ingredient pairings. He understood the chemical reactions, the thermal dynamics, but he still could not comprehend the why. Why would a sentient species devote so much energy to a chaotic, inefficient, and dangerous method of nutrient intake? It was a puzzle, and Xanon despised unsolved puzzles. This Komodo was more than a criminal. He was an anomaly, an agent of chaos, and Xanon would restore order. He would bring the full logical weight of the law down on this purveyor of weaponized nostalgia and greasy, unregulated foodstuffs. The Umbra 9 moon was less a civilization and more a collection of scoundrels who had agreed not to shoot each other on sight most of the time. Its primary exports were rust, regret, and things that had fallen off the back of a spaceship. It was the perfect place to shop. Lucas's first stop was a dim, humid biodome run by a creature named Pleeks, who hoarded rare microorganisms. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp soil and decay. Saccharomyces cerevisiae? Pleeks hissed. Two of his arms stroked a pulsating fungus in a jar, while a third polished the counter and the fourth gestured vaguely at a shelf of vials. The earth strain, very rare, very vintage. The Council frowns upon such things. The Council frowns upon joy, Lucas replied, sliding a small stack of credits onto the counter. I need a vial potent enough to raise a dough with high gluten content in a low-pressure environment. Pleek's eyes glinted. Ah, a connoisseur. Credits are so impersonal for such a personal request. This will cost you something more. Tell me about the project. I collect stories of creation. They feed my fungi. Lucas hesitated, then decided honesty was the strangest currency he possessed. A Chicago-style deep-dish pizza, delivery to the Oracle system. Pleek's forearms went still. A low gurgle of what might have been laughter came from his throat. A pie for the star gods themselves, a worthy tale. You may have yeast. May your creation be legendary. While Lucas secured the yeast, Fez was in the scrap market orchestrating a small masterpiece of misdirection. She found the yard boss, a hulking, greasy man with cybernetic eyes, and spun a frantic story about a failing atmospheric sensor on her ship, waving a busted component she'd pulled from their junk pile. As he was distracted, squinting at her fake part and quoting her an outrageous price, Hesh, on the other side of the vast yard,
accidentally nudged a precarious stack of heavy-gauge plating. The resulting clash was loud enough to draw the attention of every scavenger in a 100-meter radius. In the confusion, Fez slipped into a storage bay, located a crate of high-grade tomato pulp that had been misplaced behind a pile of busted servitors, and swapped its inventory tag with a nearby crate of industrial lubricant. She returned to the ship with a triumphant smirk and 20 cans of the finest crushed tomatoes money couldn't legally buy. Hesh's mission was the cheese. He found a Gorvian merchant, a massive tusked being known for their aggressive bartering tactics. The Gorvian was trying to sell him a block of rubbery, tasteless, nutrient curd. Hesh simply shook his head. "This feels dishonest," he said, his voice rumbling with quiet disappointment. The Gorvian scoffed. "It's protein. What more do you want?" Hesh pointed a thick finger at a small waxed seal crate in the back of the stall, half hidden under a tarp.
"I want the crate that smells of contentment."
The merchant's eyes widened. That was his private stash. Real, smuggled, high-fat mozzarella from a boutique agri world. How could this hulking Lithan possibly know? He tried to bluster, to intimidate, but there was something in Hesh's simple, honest gaze that was disarming. He was just a foodie. "Contentment?" the Gorvian grunted. "It's coagulated milk protein, nothing more."
"To you," Hesh replied calmly, "to my senses, it speaks of green fields and a peaceful sun. It is a worthy component."
Defeated by this strange poetic logic, the Gorvian sighed and sold him the entire crate for a surprisingly fair price. Back on the flying skillet, they laid out their haul in the galley. The chrome counters, usually empty, were now a shrine to their illicit mission. Their precious vial of yeast, the cans of rich red tomato pulp, the glorious milky white blocks of mozzarella, the fennel-spiced sausage Lucas had managed to procure from a butcher who asked no questions and took payment in untraceable crypto. Lucas looked at the ingredients, a feeling of profound purpose settling over him. He began the ritual. He activated the yeast, kneaded the dough, and seasoned the sauce. The council called this unregulated chemical warfare. They saw chaos in a recipe, a dangerous concoction of unpredictable components. Lucas saw the opposite. This was order. The activation temperature of the yeast, the controlled layering of ingredients, a moisture barrier of cheese, a protein layer of sausage, an acidic topping of tomatoes to cut the richness. It was architecture. He mastered chaos, taming it on a baking pan. He pressed the thick dough into a deep, circular pan, building up the high walls that defined the Chicago style. He layered it with reverence, a thick blanket of sliced mozzarella first, then the sausage, and finally, a generous ladle of the rich, chunky tomato sauce over the top. A final dusting of Parmesan, and it was ready. A masterpiece of edible engineering.
"It is beautiful," Hesh breathed. "It feels hopeful."
Lucas carefully placed the uncooked pizza into the ship's convection oven. "Phase 1 is complete," he said. "Now we just have to fly through a military blockade and deliver it before it gets cold." "Simple," Fez said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She pushed off the doorframe. "I'll go start the engines. Try not to get any sauce on the console." Just as they cleared Umbra 9's grimy atmosphere, the proximity alarm blared. Lucas's stomach dropped. "Already?" he yelled, rushing to the cockpit. On the main screen, a single ship was visible. It was sleek, angular, and gunmetal gray, bearing the unmistakable insignia of the Council Enforcement Division, a top-of-the-line pursuit vessel. "The gavel," Fez breathed, her hands tightening on the controls. "That's Xanon's ship." "He found us," Lucas whispered. It was faster than he could have imagined. "How?" "Doesn't matter how," Fez snapped, her focus absolute. "Hesh, battle stations, reroute everything you can to the engines and aft shields."
"Understood,"
Hesh said, his fingers already moving across his console, diverting power with calm deliberation. "Warning!" The gavel's voice came over their comms, cold and synthesized. You are in violation of the Galactic Human Cuisine Prohibition Act. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance is illogical."
"He's hailing us?" Lucas said incredulously. "Who does that anymore?" "Someone who's very, very confident," Fez growled. She glanced at the nav computer. "There's an asteroid field a few clicks off our port bow. It's our only chance." "It's not on the charts as a stable field," Lucas protested. "Then he won't expect us to go in there," she yelled, and yanked the yoke hard to port. The flying skillet groaned as it veered towards the swirling cloud of rock and ice. The gavel followed, its movements exact and economical. A volley of ion cannon fire streaked past them, designed to disable, not destroy. "He's trying to capture us," Lucas realized. "He wants the pizza as evidence." "He's not getting my ship," Fez snarled. She plunged them into the asteroid field. The cockpit became a chaotic ballet. Massive chunks of rock tumbled past the viewport. Fez was in her element, a focused whirlwind of instinct and skill. "Hesh, brace the port side inertial dampener. We're about to clip a big one," Fez shouted. The ship shuddered as they scraped past a rock the size of a small moon. A red light flashed on Lucas's console. "Shields are fluctuating," he yelled. "Lucas, get the yeast culture into the secondary stasis," Fez ordered, her eyes never leaving the deadly dance outside. "The main field is dropping with the shields. That stuff is priceless." "On it!" He unstrapped and scrambled back to the galley. Hesh was right behind him. The ship lurched violently, and Lucas was thrown against a bulkhead. The uncooked pizza, sitting on a prep counter, slid precariously towards the edge. "The payload!" Hesh bellowed, lunging forward. He caught the heavy pan just as it was about to fly across the room, cradling it like a newborn infant. Another blast rocked the ship. This one was closer, sending a shower of sparks down from a ceiling conduit. "Fez, aft shields are at 30%, Lucas yelled into his wrist comm, fumbling to secure the vial of yeast in a small shielded container. "I know," she yelled back, her voice strained. "I'm a little busy right now." She flew the ship into a tight corkscrew maneuver, using a large asteroid as cover. The ion blasts harmlessly impacted the rock behind them. "She is a poet," Hesh said, his eyes wide with admiration, as he carefully placed the pizza back in its secure spot. Lucas managed to get the yeast secured, just as Fez's voice came over the comm again, strained but triumphant. "I see an opening, a gravity well from that dwarf star. If I time it right, we can slingshot out of here." "Do it!" Lucas shouted. He and Hesh braced themselves. The ship's engines screamed as Fez pushed them to their absolute limit. They shot towards a small, intensely bright star at the edge of the field. For a moment, Lucas was sure they were going to be incinerated. Then Fez pulled them into a sharp, gravity-assisted turn, and they were flung out of the asteroid field like a stone from a sling. They were clear. Behind them, the gavel was forced to pull back, unable to match their reckless maneuver. Silence descended on the cockpit, broken only by the panting of the crew and the beeping of a dozen damage alerts. "Status report," Lucas said, his voice hoarse. Fez slumped in her chair. "We're alive," she said, "but the hyperdrive is fried, completely. That last power surge did it in. We're stuck in this system until I can rebuild the primary coil." Lucas looked at the nav chart. They were in the middle of nowhere, except there was one small blip on the screen. A junk trader moon, barely a speck. "There," he said, pointing. "Set a course for that." Fez sighed. "Great, another charming rust-themed vacation spot. I'll see if they have postcards." The junk trader moon was named Dreg 7, which told you everything you needed to know about it. It was a desolate rock, home to a single sprawling scrapyard and a cantina that looked like it had been built out of pure despair. They landed the flying skillet in a secluded canyon, hidden from the main trading post. Fez immediately dove into the guts of the engine room, a string of creative curses echoing from the maintenance shaft. Lucas and Hesh stood guard outside, the thin, metallic-tasting air cold on their faces. "The pilot seems displeased," Hesh observed, his breath misting in the air. "She's happiest when she's complaining about something she can fix," Lucas replied, scanning the jagged horizon. "It's when she's quiet you have to worry."
Hours passed. Fez worked tirelessly, her small frame disappearing into the ship's machinery. When Fez needed a tool, Hesh would simply pass her the right hydrospanner or plasma welder before she even had to ask, their movements a silent, interlocking dance of long familiarity. Inside the ship, with their escape uncertain and their mission in jeopardy, Lucas decided he couldn't wait. The dough wouldn't last forever. He needed to pre-bake the crust. He fired up the oven. Soon, an aroma began to fill the cramped confines of the ship. It was the rich, warm, intoxicating scent of baking bread, melting cheese, and savory tomato sauce. It was the smell of home. Fez emerged from the engine room, covered in grease and soot, her face etched with exhaustion. She stopped dead, her nose twitching. Hesh, drawn by the scent, came in from the cold. The three of them stood in the galley, staring at the oven door as if it were a holy relic. The pizza, now partially baked, sat on the cooling rack, steam rising from its surface. The crust was golden brown, the cheese was a molten pool of deliciousness, and the sauce had deepened into a rich dark red. It was a beacon of warmth and hope in the cold, broken ship. In the silence, Lucas could hear the soft hum of the ship's life support and the rumble in his own stomach. He watched Fez's gaze linger on the pizza, her usual hard edges softened by hunger. Hesh swallowed, a deep, audible sound in the quiet galley. The temptation to just cut into it, to abandon the mission and enjoy this one perfect thing, was overwhelming. Hesh let out a low, mournful groan, a sound of pure, primal desire. Fez looked at the pizza, then at Hesh's agonized face, then at Lucas. Her pragmatic shell seemed to crack for a moment. "That," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft, "smells unfairly good." Lucas felt it too, a gnawing hunger that was about more than just food. It was a hunger for success, for a single uncomplicated win. But he couldn't. This was for their future. He took a deep, steadying breath, the rich aroma filling his lungs. "It's for the client," he said, his voice firm. He placed a magnetic cover over the pizza, hiding it from view but not from smell. "Fez, how's the hyperdrive?" Fez snapped back to reality. She wiped a smudge of grease from her cheek. "It's shot. I can't rebuild the coil with the scrap they have here. It's completely useless." They were trapped. The smell of the perfect, unattainable pizza filled the silence. Aboard the Gavel, Inspector Zanin analyzed the data from their failed pursuit. The smuggler's ship signature had vanished after a high-risk slingshot maneuver. Less skilled officers would have assumed they'd escaped into hyperspace. Zanin knew better. He studied the schematics of their vessel, the Flying Skillet. He noticed its maximum velocity, its shield strength, and the reported strain on its power core during the chase. He cross-referenced this with the known instability of the asteroid field's gravity well. "Their hyperdrive will have sustained critical damage," he announced to the empty bridge. His subordinate was currently in the medbay being treated for motion sickness. "They are stranded in the Epsilon 9 sector. Their only viable landing site for repairs is the moon Dreg 7. He felt a flicker of logical completion, the clean finality of a proven theorem. He was closing the net. He set a course for Dreg 7, but ordered his ship to remain at the edge of the system, cloaked. A direct approach would spook them. He would wait. He would predict their next move. They were desperate. Desperate people make predictable mistakes. To pass the time, he pulled up an archival video on Komodo. He bypassed the news footage, accessing an old pre-prohibition Earth broadcast. A cooking show. A cheerful human in an apron was demonstrating a recipe. He was kneading dough, folding it, pressing it. Zanin watched, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. The process was inefficient, messy, and relied on imprecise measurements like a pinch and a dash. The host spoke of love and passion as ingredients. Illogical. Why would they celebrate such chaos? Why would they film it? "The key to a good dough," the man said on the screen with a folksy grin, "is not to overthink it. You gotta feel it." Zanin recoiled.
feel it. It was madness. And yet, he kept watching. He saw the host slide the finished product, a loaf of bread, from an oven. The studio audience applauded. The data file noted that post-broadcast consumption rates of the featured foodstuff spiked by 98%. It was a chaotic, illogical process that produced a predictable, powerful result. It was a weapon that masqueraded as comfort. The morbid fascination he felt was a crack in the perfect smooth surface of his logic, a tiny hairline fracture. He had to understand the why, and to do that, he had to get his hands on the evidence and its creator. "The hyperdrive is shot," Fez repeated, confirming Lucas's worst fears. "The primary coil is slag." Lucas stared at the nav chart. Dreg 7, the Oracle system. A vast, uncrossable ocean of empty space between them. "So we're stuck." "Not necessarily," Lucas said slowly, an idea taking shape, a terrible and brilliant spark in the darkness of their situation. He brought up a different chart on the main screen, one overlaid with faint, archaic markings from old prospector logs. "There might be another way." He pointed to a wavering line that was almost invisible on the standard charts. The old prospectors called it the Serpent's Run, a stable subspace rift. It's a fold in space-time, a natural shortcut that runs almost all the way to the Oracle system. Fez scoffed. "Those are myths, Lucas. Ghost stories pilots tell. Even if it's real, the tidal forces at the entry point would shred us into our component atoms. Not if we hit it at exactly the right speed and angle," Lucas countered, his excitement growing. "That's what the maneuver is for. The gravity wells, the neutron star, the gas giant. They won't throw us across space. No ship could survive that. They'll give us the insane velocity we need to skip across the surface of the rift, like a stone on water. We'll ride the edge of its event horizon, letting it carry us." Fez stared at him, then at the charts, her mind racing. She started running calculations, her fingers a blur across the console. The numbers that appeared on the screen were a cascade of terrifying probabilities and infinitesimal margins for error. The G-forces would be crushing. The navigation would have to be perfect to a nanosecond. A slow, dangerous grin spread across her face. "Finally," she said, her voice filled with a manic glee, "something interesting!" "It's a 1 in a billion shot," Lucas warned. "I've made a career out of 1 in a billion shots," Fez shot back, already rerouting what little power they had left. "Hesh, strap everything down, and I mean everything. This is going to be a rough ride." Hesh appeared in the doorway, his expression serene. "My faith in the pilot is well seasoned." He went back into the galley to secure the precious cargo, meticulously strapping the covered pizza pan into a cushioned, gimbaled container he'd welded to the floor. "All right," Lucas said, taking a deep breath and strapping himself in. "Let's go skip a rock across the universe." The maneuver was terrifyingly beautiful. They skimmed Dreg 7's atmosphere, using its gravity to fling them towards the distant, wavering point on the neutron star. The ship groaned, the inertial dampeners screaming as they hit the first gravity well. Then they were whipped around the neutron star, the view outside distorting into a tunnel of stretched light. They were no longer just flying fast. They were aiming for a hole in reality. Ahead, the entrance to the Serpent's Run wavered, a barely visible distortion in space. "This is it!" Fez yelled over the roar of the engines. "The final push! Hold on!" She guided them into the gas giant's gravity well, using its immense pull for the final critical course correction and acceleration. The ship bucked and rattled, alarms wailing a symphony of imminent doom. Then they were through. Instead of being torn apart, the flying skillet settled into a state of surreal calm. They were sliding along the edge of the rift, a river of roiling, purple-black energy. Space itself was flowing past them, carrying them at unimaginable speeds. They arrived with a jolt, dropping out of the rift into the calm, orderly space of the Ametrine military zone. On the screen, a stunning orbital habitat hung against the backdrop of a nebula. It was a delicate latticework structure of spun metal and glass that glowed with a soft internal light. An Ametrine military cruiser immediately locked onto them,
"Unidentifiable vessel," a crisp, authoritative voice hailed them. "You have entered a restricted zone. State your identity and purpose." Lucas keyed the comm. "Delivery for the Admiral," he said, his voice shaky. "We have his deep dish composite." There was a pause. Then the voice came back slightly warmer. "Your arrival was anticipated. Proceed to Docking Bay Alpha. A guide will meet you." The cruiser escorted them in. As they docked, the crew exchanged looks of disbelief. They had made it. A sleek, silent droid led them from the docking bay through silent, immaculate corridors to a private viewing deck. The view was breathtaking. Standing with his back to them, looking out at the stars, was a tall, imposing figure in a crisp white uniform. Admiral Tyran turned around. His face was just as stern and disciplined as Lucas remembered, but his eyes held a different expression. Not anger, not malice. It was an intense, burning curiosity. "Mr. Komodo," the Admiral said, his voice a low rumble, "you are more resourceful than your service record indicated." Lucas, Fez, and Hesh stood awkwardly, a trio of grease-stained, weary smugglers in the presence of military royalty. Lucas held the thermal case containing the pizza. "You're not going to arrest us?" Fez asked, ever the pragmatist. Tyran gave a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Arrest you? Mr. Komodo, I have gone to great expense to bring you here. Why would I arrest the artist I commissioned?" "I owe you an apology, Mr. Komodo," Admiral Tyran said, his gaze fixed on the case in Lucas's hands. "My reaction at the gala was unintended. It was a biological anomaly. It cost you your career. For that, I am truly sorry." Lucas was speechless. He'd expected a trap, a confrontation, a gloating villain, not a formal apology. "But my apology is not the primary reason you are here," the Admiral continued, his voice taking on a new intensity. "You must understand the Amatrine psyche. We are beings of order. Our minds perceive the universe as a series of complex but logical equations. Hyperspace, celestial mechanics, orbital physics, it's all data. It's all understandable." He took a step closer. "When I consumed your food, I experienced a beautiful, terrifying, exhilarating chaos of sensation that my mind is still struggling to categorize. It was an anomaly of the highest order." His eyes gleamed with an intellectual fervor. "I have spent 3 years studying that moment. I came to a conclusion. What you do is not merely combining ingredients. It is a form of art that introduces a deliberate, calculated chaos into a biological system, and I must understand it." He gestured to a table that had risen silently from the floor. "I did not hire a simple smuggler, Mr. Komodo. I hired the artist. I want to experience the deep dish pizza," Tyran said, the words sounding both alien and reverent. "I want to understand the beautiful chaos you create." Just as Lucas was about to open the case, red lights flashed. Alarms blared. "Intruder alert!" a computerized voice announced. "Unauthorized docking at Bay Gamma. Security breach." Tyran looked genuinely shocked. "How? This is a shielded military installation. No one can dock without my explicit authorization." A set of blast doors at the far end of the chambers hissed open. A lone figure strode in, his posture rigid, his face a mask of cold, implacable logic. He held a Council-issue plasma pistol. It was Inspector Zanin. "Lucas Komodo," Zanin said, his voice flat and triumphant. "You are under arrest for the creation, transportation, and intent to distribute a Class A unregulated protein carbohydrate composite." "Inspector!" Tyran snapped, his authority absolute. "How did you get here?" "Your security is designed to repel a fleet, Admiral," Zanin replied without looking at him. "It is not designed to cross-reference the cargo manifest of a weekly sanitation freighter against Level 9 Council override procedures. An override code I have spent the last month acquiring through persistent inquiry. Your station's visitor AI registered me as a waste management oversight.
It seems even an ametrine system has a logical blind spot for the mundane.
The standoff was absurd. A decorated admiral, the galaxy's most wanted chef, his ace pilot and foodie bodyguard, and a fanatically brilliant inspector all staring at each other over a pizza. Lucas looked from Xanon's unwavering pistol to the Admiral's thunderous face, to Fez, who was slowly reaching for the hydrospanner tucked in her belt. This was it, the end of the line. Unless... He placed the thermal case on the table and opened it. The aroma, magnified and perfected by their insane journey, filled the room. It was an olfactory symphony. "Before you arrest us, Inspector," Lucas said, his voice steady, "the law requires you to analyze the evidence, does it not? To fully understand the nature of the crime?" He used a small spatula to lift a perfect triangular slice from the pan. The cheese stretched in long, glorious strands. He held it out on a plate. Xanon scoffed.
"Do you take me for a fool, Komodo? Your crude grease cake is a known bioweapon. I will not be poisoned."
"Inspector," Admiral Tyran said, his voice cutting through the tension, "you are on my station. You have accused me of conspiracy. You will humor my guest." His eyes bore into Xanon. It was a direct command. Xanon froze. His entire being was built on a foundation of rules. He could not disobey. With a rigid, jerky motion, he lowered his pistol. He took the plate. He stared at the slice of pizza as if it were a venomous creature. Bound by his code, he took a bite. For a Grishan, the experience was a cataclysm. The favor was a data storm, a sensory tsunami that crashed through every firewall in his brain. The umami, the fat, the salt, the complex carbohydrates. It was a symphony of information flooding his consciousness. His rigid, orderly worldview didn't just crack, it shattered. He stood motionless, the pizza in his hand, a conduit to a universe of sensation he never knew existed. His mind, a fortress of logic, was breached. To follow the law was to deny this new, profound, and vital data. To accept the data was to break the law. The paradox was excruciating, a logic loop that threatened to crash his entire consciousness. Then, clarity. There was only one logical path forward: acquire more data. The experiment must be repeatable, and for that to happen, the source, the artist, could not be compromised. He slowly raised his hand to his comlink.
"Inspector Xanon Bridge," he said, his voice strangely thick. "My sensor logs are malfunctioning. The smuggler's ship, the Flying Skillet, appears to have vanished into a solar flare while resisting arrest. A tragic loss of council evidence."
He turned off his comms. He looked at Lucas, and for the first time, there was something other than contempt in his eyes. It was a bewildered, profound respect.
"Be more discreet in the future, Mr. Komodo,"
he said stiffly. Then, without another word, he turned and strode out of the room, leaving the plate with the half-eaten slice behind. Silence descended. Then Admiral Tyran let out a laugh. It was a booming, joyous, unrestrained sound that echoed through the vast chamber.
"Mr. Komodo," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "It is even more chaotic than I remembered."
He slid a credit chip across the table. It was heavy.
"Your payment, with a substantial bonus for services rendered, and for the entertainment."
He picked up the slice Xanon had left behind and took a thoughtful bite. A look of pure, analytical bliss crossed his face.
"This is not the end," the Admiral said. "It is the beginning of a delicious new partnership. I have a list. Tacos, something called a Reuben sandwich, a chili dog."
Lucas, Fez, and Hesh looked at each other, stunned. Then Fez started to laugh. Then Hesh. Finally, Lucas grinned, a wide, genuine grin of pure, unadulterated triumph. He picked up the spatula, cut 2 more enormous slices, and handed one to each of his friends. They had risked everything for this pizza. They had fought, fled, and broken the laws of physics for it. And now, finally, triumphant, they dug in. And it was, without a doubt, the best meal of their lives.